are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Bill Baker, and we're pleased that you can join us for this webinar. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series, number 1 in the 2017 series. Today we're going to be discussing about benchmarking preparedness. How do we know if we're ready? We'd also like to have you become our friend on Facebook. If we can get the slides to move.
There you go.
There we go.
They move.
Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. Twitter, we're Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risks and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Our attorneys require that we say this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this work product should be discussed in accordance with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion.
So we're going to jump over, Bill, I think at this point and reach out to Brenda Truelove from the University of Alabama, and Brenda, I would hope you would talk to us a little bit about some of the new things that are going on at the University of Alabama.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for those who called in. This year is going to be an exciting year for the University of Alabama and College of Continuing Studies. I particularly work in the area of corporate engagement, and we are always looking for and developing programming that will help businesses be successful. In 2017, we are pleased again to be offering a workshop that is our third in the series on professionally speaking, which will be hosted at the Bryant Conference Center on February 10, 2017. And it really goes well with the topic, Are You Prepared? There's nothing like thinking that you are about to get up to speak to a large group of individuals, and did you do your homework? Are you prepared to speak? Will your message, be heard? So we are really targeting business executives, professionals, those who are in charge of management teams, who really need help to craft their messages, to hone their skills. And a lot of people we are finding are really needing assistance to overcome public speaking anxiety. So we have some really awesome instructors who are professors here at the University of Alabama who are very skilled in helping not only our student population but business professionals work on these really critical skills in the business place. They are Dr. Alexa Chilcutt and Dr. Adam Brooks. Both of these individuals are just a joy to know and work with, but they're sincerely interested in people and their skill sets, and are happy to share their expertise in crafting effective messaging, cultivating a dynamic speaking opportunity. So again, that information showing on the screen, February 10th, University of Alabama, Bryant Conference Center. The registration services staff numbers are listed on the screen, as well as our website. And anyone can always contact me, Brenda Truelove, 205-348-9066. I'll be glad to share the information again. Thank you, Jim, for this opportunity, and looking forward to a great 2017 with you in Firestorm. Oh, there's our picture popped up on the screen, our corporate engagement. Good job.
Well, listen, guys, the University of Alabama does a great job. It's a way to expand the resources at your organization and learn more about what it takes to work, and that phrase, Bama at work. So we're very pleased to have the University of Alabama College of Continuing Education as an underwriter for this webinar series and sharing their input. And thank you all for joining today. In fact, Bill Baker, who you heard at the beginning of the broadcast, our Vice President of Operation, we were looking at the long list of attendees, and several of you have attended lots of our webinars. And if you would like to participate in and be a part of our panel or speaking group, on a particular webinar, let us know. If you've got a topic that you'd like to hear more about, you can also share that information with us at webinars@firestorm.com. This is, I think, about the 5th year we've been doing this with the University of Alabama, and we're very pleased to have you join us as we talk. I'm Jim Satterfield. I'm president and co-founder of Firestorm, and we've got a lot of new exciting things that are happening, and in our webinars next month we'll be sharing some of those details with you. Today we're talking about benchmarking and benchmarking preparedness, and this webinar series is underwritten by the University of Alabama, and thank you, Brenda, for all that you do and the university does in this process. Brenda and I did have a conversation just recently, because a lot of our webinars feature around the subject of workplace violence, and there was a hostage situation at the university in the credit union, and the fortunate news for everyone involved in that experience is it ended positively without injury or death, and that's always our prayer in any of these types of events. And so there's a lot to think about as we're focusing in on these areas. The benchmarking theme, though, came up to help us all focus on, are we ready? Can we respond to those types of events, and how do you know, and are you sure? Your employees generally are focused on, what have we done in our company? What do we have to do? What are the exposures and the risk? And can you identify your organization's next crisis? And you'll see boldly written there, we can. And what we find in many of these situations is it's how you respond to the emergency or crisis event that's in front of you that will determine how the outcome will come. So we're going to think through today about this whole area of benchmarking, and there's an expectation of management of risk. Are my employees safe? There are those questions again, are you sure, and how do you know? And so there's a requirement from a fiduciary and a governance responsibility to make sure that we've got a risk management processes in place, that we're evaluating those risks, that we have controls and oversight of monitoring how we see those being developed. And we're going to talk about the individual requirements for your plans in just a few minutes and give you a tool that you can evaluate, how does my organization rank relative to standards and best practices in each area. So why do you want to measure these things? Well, there are a couple of slides on that, but it's obviously you want to know, can you survive? Unfortunately, there are some events that could disrupt your organization significantly. We think very quickly about natural disasters, fires and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes. Violence, as we were talking about just a few seconds ago, is an increasing problem and exposure in our country that we're forced to deal with. We're increasingly being asked to help organizations at the C-suite level and at the board level on how to manage an event that could destroy the company's brand and reputation. If you think about a lot of the things that have happened over the last year, and increasingly we get events that are related to fraud, things like the Wells Fargo loan creation and account creation by 5,300 employees. You saw just recently where the admission controls by one of the automotive manufacturers resulted in a $6 billion fine, both civilly and criminally. These types of events out there will have a significant impact on the organization. So do you need to improve? Do you follow best practices? What are the gaps? So today we're going to be talking about what you can do within your organization. So if you're going to do that, you've got to start to say, where are we and where are we going to go and how's the best way to get there? That's going to be a key focus. What should we be measuring? Well, it's how you can demonstrate that you in fact are prepared. Do you have clear roles and responsibilities? Does your plan cover both what to do and how to do? Most of the plans that we pick up and review for a client have a lot of the what, but not much of the how. I met with a public company last fall, and they had a need to communicate with all of their employees at home about what was going to be happening the next day. at work. And so their plan said notify all employees at home. But then they started to look. They didn't have everyone's home phone number. They didn't have personal email addresses. So the what was there, notify employees at home. The how was missing within their plan. And so you're going to find that repeatedly. One quick way to determine if your plan is how-oriented or what-oriented is take your plan and give it to one of your newest hires. Then give them a scenario and have them look and see if the plan tells them what to do in that particular event. If they're unclear or they can't find it, the chances are that plan isn't going to become actionable when you critically need it. So how should you begin to measure? I would recommend that you get, if you don't have a formal business continuity staff or a program team within your organization, get at least 3 people to read your plan. Number of plans that you actually read through, you'll find there are typos, you'll find the same group is called by multiple different names, there's confusion within it. So having them read through and then review it and discuss it will help. Also have them perform an inspection, looking at your property and to see what's involved there, and I'll step you through some thoughts to think about. But how do you identify the risk? Have you had a security assessment? Have you looked at the components at least annually? Have you tested those and have those elements beginning to work? Those are the beginning points of how we would go about measuring where you were. Now today we're going to go through the major elements and will allow you to do an evaluation, so that would give you an indication. If you find that there's a void, those would be the areas that I would set as priorities for you moving forward. We'll also give you another option at the end today. So if you're thinking about a site assessment, and we're going to think around security, you're going to be concerned with access and communications. You'll see the word lighting listed there. Looking at your property in the daylight versus at night, it's completely different. Are there blind spots? Are the shrubberies up to the building? Are the fences in disrepair and working? We recently worked with a manufacturer and went to all their locations nationally and found a great disparity from what happened from one location to another. But you'll see it's not just about physical things, it's about people. See the security personnel listed. Look at the policies and procedures that are there, the signage, controlling the access across the property. So if we think about that, then we figure out what do we measure against. We'll go into much greater detail in just a moment about it, but there should be a program framework. What is it you're trying to structure? How are you structuring it? What are your teams? Do you have a crisis management team for senior leadership? Do you have a response team that's going to help direct the actions that are there? How is it integrated? Do you have an event activation matrix that tells you able to recognize, is this a serious event or a minor event? All of those elements in coming together will work in building the plan. A risk assessment. What are the risks that you face in your organization? Now, I would recommend that once every 3 years you go back to square zero and start to rebuild and looking at that. One of the common failures that we find is that there are 5 top failures, and the third in that group is the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. If you've identified a risk, how do we monitor to see that that risk is about to occur? Workplace violence is a growing concern. There are 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the United States, and as we've seen civil unrest and terrorism on U.S. soil, it's certainly one that you need to be aware of. We recommend that you get involved when there's a behavior of concern before it escalates up to a violence level. And a lot of our webinars focus specifically around those particular areas. What are you doing from a security standpoint? What's your HR policies? Is there a clear emergency response plan? How do you notify and alert within those areas? And crisis communications, what are you going to say? What are you most concerned about? Have we planned our messaging out in each of those areas? So in thinking about that, here's a structure for you to begin to framework. I'm going to actually give you 2 slightly different versions of this to go through. Think about each component that we're going to list in just a moment. Is it documented? It's well documented and it aligns with best practices, then you would give it that D rating for documented. it's verbally in place. We don't have it documented someplace, but everybody generally knows this is what we're going to do and how we're going to go about it. An I is, we've got some stuff, but we really need to improvement. It's incomplete. And the last, that red in the U, is it's not in place, no evidence found within the program. To go into each of those words a little bit more, you'll see here a description when we talk about documented, that the plans are in alignment with best practices, the procedures are actionable, not just the what, but the how, that's comprehensive, and they follow it. And I gave an example here of one of the standards, which is the standard response protocol for employees. That's lockdown, lockout, shelter in place, and evacuate. And that can be used in an all hazards approach. And here's the standard protocol as you see listed. And there's an example of just one. There are many standards that are out in various components of the plans, and you want to make sure that you are following what is included. Now, the incomplete, it's, yeah, they're there, but we need to have some further detail associated with it. Undocumented is indicates there was no content around at any point. And then finally is the revised. Now, that's different, a little different word than that I had on the first screen. So I'm not really concerned whether you're calling it revise or completely going back to the term here of not in place. So however you would look, when you think about it, we just aren't there, those are going to become our highest priorities to begin to work. So let's jump ahead now, and we're going to look at some 24 different components to focus on. For each one, I would like you to then do that rating. Is it documented? Is it not? Is it incomplete? Is it needs to be revised? Where is it? If you can't put your hands on it, it doesn't exist. Have you trained your people on that, and have you tested it? Because the answers in those blocks will help you set the priorities of what you need to work on. For example, risk management, whether it's an enterprise risk management program or business continuity or workplace violence or any of these other areas, are requirements that should be directed by the board to senior leadership to assure that they're in place. And there should be a board resolution directing management to do that. The other advantage that it does is that gives you the ability to have a budget to be able to be funded in these areas. So as you think about it, this is the first key component. If you don't have senior leadership buy-in, your plans are not going to be effective as it continues on. There needs to be a framework document, and that lays out how we're structured, the key elements of the plans, the teams, how everything is activated, who's responsible at what individual area. So is it complete? Where is it located? Have you trained on it? Have you tested? A dedicated team. It probably should have an S after the word team, unless you're a small organization. Strategic decisions are generally made by the crisis management team. They then direct the incident response team or the emergency response team or safety team, as you would call it in your corporation, then to be the arms and legs and eyes and ears in directing that response and having a clearer understanding of how those teams work together and the responses. If there is no budget, it's going to fail within your organization. Budgets could be used for a variety of things. Safety equipment, locks on doors, key cards, lights, cameras, staff, training. But without a budget, you cannot expect to have an effective plan in place. In a school environment, the figure is 2%. 2% of the annual budget of a school should be related to the areas that we have been talking about. The percentage is unique to each industry segment. If you'd like to know more about what we're seeing across all the companies, we can certainly talk with you about your organization and what the requirement would be. You need to do a risk and vulnerability analysis, and you would update it annually, and then once every 3 years, as I mentioned earlier, you would come back and go through it. Everyone talks about an all hazards approach, and that means you think about natural events, the flood, the severe winter storms, those types of things, man-made events. That could be an accident, a spill, of violence. It could be an operational issue that could be a risk factor. And what we're now starting to see is that it could relate to a brand or reputation area. If you think about your company, there are 4 areas where the risk comes in. One is something could happen to our facility. A second is something could happen to our people. That could be the violence or the communicable illness. A third is something that could happen to our technology. It could be an IT disaster recovery, or it could be cyber breach and exposure. And the 4th area is related to brand and reputation. What would destroy the brand and reputation of your organization? Maybe it's a product recall, maybe it's fraud, maybe it's bad acts. What would happen to your organization if suddenly the government labeled your company as taking jobs out of the country, and the impact that it would have on your organization? So that's an area that takes more to look at and to see how it's designed. A business impact analysis is one in which you look at all of these things that happen and say, what is going to be the impact on our company? And it's best to think about those impacts at the departmental level and then aggregate them up. And in doing the business impact analysis, we're looking at what could happen, what is its impact, how do we monitor it, what's the trigger, and what does it mean to our organization from a financial and an operational component. And so all of that comes together in the business impact analysis, and it would also identify internal and external dependencies. One department on another, outside vendors, are your sole source. By the way, supply chain failure is the largest single disaster and risk that we see across all companies, and the largest failure in a crisis. Most of the cyber breaches that we've been seeing about came in via the supply chain within your organization. An intelligence network then monitors all of those things that we identified up in 5 and 6 above. Today, we're in a world where if someone has ill intent, 80% of the time someone else knows, and 67% of the time 2 or more people know. And when people know, what do they do? They talk. And where do they talk today? They talk on social media. And in looking at an intelligence network, you have to say, how can we monitor that? And you may not be able to monitor it directly. You may be monitoring a derivative in that individual area. The command structure, we will tell you that every crisis needs a general. Someone has to make a decision. This is not a time for democracy. There's a structure. Here's the format. This is how decisions get to be made. What is that structure within it? The event activation matrix takes a look at the categories of risk that you face, defines triggers that you can see, and breaks that into 3 levels. Normally the levels that we work are guarded, elevated, and severe. You might think low, medium, high. Maybe you would think it's an incident, an event, or a crisis, however you would do your terminology. But the power of that event activation matrix is everyone in the company now knows if they see this occurring and it's at that level, here's the team that I need to notify, here who has control in those areas. Now, the crisis management plan is a structure in which to make decisions. All of the plans that we work on have 5 stages. Pre-action, that's before anything has occurred. Onset, what do you do when you initially are aware? Impact assessment, how bad is it? Response and recovery, how do we respond? How do we recover? And finally, post-recovery, where we can see what are the lessons learned and how do we improve. So the crisis management structure gives the senior leadership that ability, because everything you learn initially in a crisis is going to be wrong, and you're going to be forced to make decisions on wrong information. That's why it's so important to have a structure. Emergency response is probably the strongest that we find in most organizations, because most organizations know about a fire drill. They know about what to do in those areas, the lockdown, the shelter in place, the lockout and evacuate. What's the structure to facilitate it? Do you have floor wardens, and do you have searchers and disability aides to help individuals? The standard protocol, which I just gave you, do you have that documented? Is that what you train to? How is that followed? Now the next group lead us into looking at risk within our organization. You'll see background checks listed as the very first. When we think about having employees work, what have they done in the past? That is an indicator of future exposure and risk. Some industries, this is a requirement to be done annually, and that would be any industry that's involved with children. Schools come directly to point. And if you do a background check in any industry and segment, if you look at the federal fraud, the federal conviction rate for a felony, that could easily be found. But if it was plea bargained down to a misdemeanor, the only way you're going to find that is at the county courthouse. So when you do your background checks, you want to make sure that that's identified. It also would help you uncover if someone had a substance abuse problem, had a DUI. Those elements would be understood. Doing it on a regular basis means if someone developed a problem, they were okay when you hired them 5 years ago, but because of those other elements, it's now started to have an impact. It gives you a chance to better understand and intercede. Anonymous reporting, that comes back to that intelligence network that we talked about earlier. You have to have ways to get that information in. Sometimes individuals are reluctant to go forward and share, but if it's anonymous, it creates that opportunity. Many of you have ethics programs that have an access to do that. That's fine, but in many of those there are delays. We've also seen a change in the workforce today where as we deal with younger and younger employees, everything is done via text. There are anonymous text reporting systems that are available. The other advantage of a text report is if I'm seeing it occur, I could sit there and send the message that an event is starting and then get that information communicated without the person who is causing the problem knowing that I'm actually sending that report in. That is probably an area you're going to see more change in the next 18 to 24 months across companies than any other. Behaviors of concern. Everyone's concerned about active shooter with all those violence episodes, and as we see those events continuing to occur, but the focus is misplaced. You need to think about a program to identify behaviors of risk before they escalate to violence. The Firestorm program there, the acronym is Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment. The acronym is BRTHA. If you don't have such a program in your organization, that's where you start on workplace violence. Crisis communications. If we're going to have things that happen, and that's what happens in business, we should go ahead and identify today what are the home bases that we would say in a disaster or a crisis. What are the messages that we would say if we had the death of an employee? What would we say if we had a product recall? Or a cyber breach? Identifying those messages in advance, it's easier to edit than it is to create. Having that separate as a crisis communications plan. Has your spokesperson been trained? Do they know how to handle those questions? By the way, we recommend that in the first 24 hours, that spokesperson is not to be the CEO or the president of the company, again, because most of what we learn initially is wrong. We've seen in the line 17, a communicable illness, you may call that a pandemic plan within your company, but we find it will be more widely accepted if you use the term communicable illness, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the swine flu or the avian flu. You could have an outbreak of smallpox. We certainly had last summer the Zika outbreak, and was a significant concern in the Miami area and affected tourism in those areas. We will be a situation within your company. Seasonal flu right now is at an all-time high. There are maps on the CDC website that can show you in your area what the level is, but this again relates to absenteeism. One of the things to remember is most of your businesses are planning on very low absenteeism at any given point. If you have a communicable illness problem in your area, suddenly you could be losing 10, 20, 30, 40% of your workforce for an extended period of time. That would certainly have a material impact on your organization. A security plan. Even a small company can have a security plan. What do we do? How do we do that? And it needs to be very direct with what the messages you send out and recognitions associated with each of those areas. A reunification plan extends well beyond thinking about a school environment, but if you had a problem and you had to evacuate your building, how do you reunify employees with their families? How do you get those areas put into place? How do you coordinate all of those activities? If you're involved in any way with children, because there could be a daycare center if you're in a public work environment, company, or if you're a school, those are certainly intensified. Training. If you don't train, don't expect to have a difference. Now, everyone is trained at their level. You would train everyone as here's what an employee needs to do. If you had an incident response team, here's what they would need to do to make sure a building is secured or evacuated. Here's how a crisis management team would be trained to make decisions, the crisis communications to be able to handle the communications. There needs to be a test exercise program. Now, the minimum standard is a test of all of your plans once a year. What you may choose to do is to break it down and test individual components or test others. Some organizations have different tests of various portions of their plans on a quarterly or even a monthly basis. I would have you think about a sports analogy here and think about muscle memory. You don't just suddenly say, oh, I own a tennis racket, so I can now go and play tennis. You have to learn. Your body has to be ready to handle what that you would do at each stage along the way. The same thing is in an exercise. So when the actual event occurs, you'll see a better performance. And having worked with hundreds of companies, we've seen that if you go through a tabletop exercise, if there is a subsequent live event or another exercise that you perform, they are significantly improved having gone through that. By the way, there is an exercise coming up next month on February the 2nd. It is one that will relate to a cyber event occurring within a company, and we're going to do 4 versions of that, one for manufacturing, one for other types of businesses, one for public schools, one for private schools, to go about how you would be making a decision in that particular area. Go on our website, you can sign up, put your crisis team around the table. It'll be a 2-hour event. We'll have subject matter experts. It's a great opportunity to test your plan at no cost. If you have to activate your plan, you want to do a hot wash afterwards. What went right? What went wrong? What do we need to update and to align our plans? And then lastly, you've got to have a maintenance program on your plans. Some components of it you have to update quarterly. Telephone numbers. You have turnover, you have changes in responsibilities. Those have to be updated on a regular basis. Other portions, like updating your risk, you might do annually. If you add a new division or you have a new acquisition within the company, clearly at that point in time you would update your plans. So as you go through and rate the completeness, identify where that material is located, confirm whether it's been trained or tested, you now can start to set the priorities of where you have to focus on. Now, Firestorm recommends following the Predict.Plan.Perform methodology. You've got to understand the vulnerabilities and threats and their impacts. How do you monitor them? What are the triggers? How do you activate your plans? Plans need to become actionable. You need to know how to do something, not just what. And then you have to perform. Do you have the supplies? Do you have the materials that you need to have in place? Do you have a structure? Do you have assets that you can call in to assist you if these other events have occurred, and have you tested your plans? So as we think about senior leadership here, I would recommend that you might do a survey in your organization asking your senior leadership, what are the specific concerns that they have? What keeps them up at night? What do they worry about in that organization? You could literally ask at every level within the company to get a determination of it. You want to update that risk and vulnerability threat assessment at least annually, and then conduct a security assessment. That we gave you a checklist just earlier of what to look for, or have an independent third party come in and help to identify those areas. under your plans, make sure they align to best practices. Perform. If you would like to have Firestorm conduct a facilitated assessment with you, this would require about 45 minutes of your time, someone who is familiar with your plan, and we'll do an interview. We'll enter it into our diagnostic equipment. We have a tool that allows us to align your answers to standards and best practices and give you a findings report. It'll say, for example, for business continuity, here are the 11 dimensions required. We look at 5 data points in each of those 11 areas, and then you'd get back a report that says, this is what the standard is, this is where you say you are, and give you a numerical score. It also gives you the ability to benchmark your plan relative to other companies and organizations. We will waive the cost of that report for your organization one time. If you would like to do that, let us know. We'll try to reach out to everyone on the call today and share that opportunity. Participate in the next Firestorm virtual exercise. As I mentioned, we've got the one coming up on February 2nd. That's a great opportunity. It's a wonderful way to test your plans. We'll do 4 more exercises this year, so you can build that into your program. And the last one is one that most organizations have not done, and that's to analyze your insurance coverage versus your current plans. If you've identified risk and threats, how does your insurance respond to each one of those? If you do an exercise in your organization, I would recommend you take the exercise that you've written, give it to your insurance broker, and ask the insurance broker to explain to you how your policy would respond in the event of the exercise that you've just identified. We did this with a large company last year, and we found that of the 8 things that happened to them in that particular crisis scenario, 6 of them weren't covered. Well, wouldn't you want to know that before the event instead of waiting until afterwards? There will be a brief on today's exercise. It should be up in the next 48 hours. If you go to firestorm.com/briefs, you'll click there and it says recorded webinars and briefs, and that would give you access to the brief related to today's webinar. You'll see many of the slides also included in the brief to give you some tools to help you with your benchmarking of your plans. It also is an opportunity for you to go back and look at previous webinars and look at the library there, and it's a free training tool that's available to your organization. Now, I'd like to thank the University of Alabama for sponsoring this webinar series, and Brenda, I think we have up on the screen about the session that's coming up next month. Anything else you want to share with us at this point?
Yes, Jim, thank you. I just want to let everyone know that, you know, even people in education need to learn and make sure that they are keeping up to date. And I find myself every time Jim gives updated information on crisis coach and other great topics, something piques my interest, and I think to myself, I need to learn more about that, and I need to share that with other individuals. So that's what we're all about. We're continuing learning, and we're trying to make sure that we have opportunities for individuals. We had a really very scary incident last week here on the campus of the university, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if they have this, this. So, you know, every institution can take the time to look at their plans, make sure their employees have the training they need, because it's very important, particularly when you're thinking about individuals that you know and love who work in a place, and you want to make sure they're okay. Are you there, Jim?
I was speaking and I had it on mute there. I was trying, and then but I'm very intelligent on the mute button, I think. It's just when you hear I'm off mute. The upcoming session, February 10th at the University of Alabama, is an opportunity if public speaking is an area that you would like to learn more about. I participated in many of the programs there, and I think the quality of the staff and the presentation, it's a great way to grow and learn more. If you have questions about this webinar or other programs that we've done, you can go to firestorm.com. There's plenty of opportunities there to listen to webinars, download papers. If you have a question, you can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, and we'll get back in touch with you, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. We will ask our staff to try to reach out to everyone on the phone today to see if there are questions in areas that we can help you with. It's important to know where your plan is relative to standards and best practices. One of the common themes that we find in any crisis situation, and after it's over, we find that many times leadership wants to explain, well, this is really why we didn't have that, or this is this other scenario. And a general rule in any crisis is if you're explaining, you're losing. The hardest call you're ever going to have to make is a call to a family to say your loved one's not coming home today. Whether it was an accident that occurred on the manufacturing floor, a violence event, an automobile or a travel accident, or any other disruption. That's going to be difficult for you to handle. So we would rather you have plans to make sure that your company can survive whatever risk or threat or vulnerability or peril that's there. If we identify those, put the monitoring programs in place, have very clear calls to action, and then detailed checklist of what to do, you're going to have a better outcome. We certainly have been seeing a lot of things in the sports world with the end of the college football season, with the Super Bowl just over the horizon. There are a lot of football teams each year. There are very few that make it to the championship game. We want you to have a championship organization and have a winning outcome in a crisis or a disaster. Understanding where your plans are relative to standards and best practices is the way that you begin. Thank you all. Thank you, Brenda. Thanks for the University of Alabama and all that you do to help everyone every day. We appreciate it. I look forward to speaking to you next month. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.